you everybody for attending today. My name is Eamon Boyle. I am an account manager with Interseed. I've been here for over 5 years. Interseed is a market leader in credential management. We're deployed in mission critical areas throughout the federal government, DoD, as well as deployments in the top healthcare agencies, system integrators, and financial institutions. In December of last year, Interseed acquired AuthLogix, which specializes in password management and multi-factor authentication. Through this acquisition, I had the pleasure of meeting James Westgate. James is one of the best in the world at what he does. I don't want to say too much. With that, I'll turn it over to you, James. And this is being recorded for everybody. Apologies. Just want to make sure everybody understands that. James, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Eamon. Those kind words. My name's James. I work at Interseed now, and during the day I'm a design authority on MFA. That means doing things like passkeys, Federation, OpenID Connect, MFA, all that kind of thing. But one of the things I like to do in my spare time is do a little bit of password cracking. Get on to what that is in a moment, and what Team HashMob Pro means as well. How many of you know what that is? That's a meme. All your base will belong to us. In this case, all your password will belong to me. If you want to know what that is, just scan that QR code. I include this for 3 reasons, just to remind myself to tell you. 1, we're here to just have a little bit of fun, nerd out a bit, relax. 2, there may be things you don't get. Things might be a little bit technical from time to time, but don't worry, we'll return to like less technical within a few slides. So stay with me. And 3, on that topic, I give this as a workshop as well, and there's some screenshots and references to things like Hashcat and command line and terminal, that kind of thing. We're only going to do screenshots today. Unfortunately, we can't do hands-on. We don't have enough time. But if you're interested in, a full workshop version of this, then let myself or Eamon know, and we'll see what we can do. What we're going to do today, we've done a quick intro. We'll do some history, just very, very quickly set the scene. What is a password hash? What is that? And how do we crack those things? Sounds like drugs or something, but it's not, I promise you. We'll look at data breaches. Where do we get this information? What are the legalities around that? That sort of thing. And then right at the end, we'll just quickly touch on how does this affect me personally? How does this affect me as an organization? I have MFA, I have PKI. Surely this isn't a problem. Stick around. You may be surprised. And I think Eamon's got a special offer or something at the end as well. So my hacker handle, Jim Molina. I'm a member of HashMob Pro password cracking team. Yes, you could do this competitively. We came first at CypherCon 2022, my team and some amazingly smart people. And 3rd place last year at DEF CON 2022, and we're just getting ready to go to DEF CON in a couple of weeks' time. So if you're at DEF CON, drop by Password Village. Some of my colleagues will be there. Come and see what we do. Especially if you enjoy this, come check it out. We try and be as approachable as possible. And personally, I just checked the other day. I've now cracked over 24 million password hashes. So I've done this a few times. So what do we do? What is password cracking? What's going on here? Well, my boss thinks it's something like this, like a 90s movie, cool stuff, maybe a bit of Matrix or something. I like to think of it as something closer to this. But the reality is there's actually quite a lot of waiting around, hoping for something to crack, waiting for your computer while it generates a lot of heat. So really what password cracking is, we're going to recover that plain text password, your actual password, from data breaches. It can be, Active Directory or some other kind of password storage directory, and sometimes just artificial challenges and competitions. And we do this to demonstrate, that these passwords aren't being stored in a particularly secure way usually, and we want to improve that situation, right? And it's actually surprisingly fun, especially if you're a little bit technical. It's actually really quite enjoyable, and hopefully I can show that to you today. When is this not password cracking? When you need to call, maybe not this guy, but a lawyer. So if you're doing anything on this list, then that's not password cracking. That's just something illegal. So anytime you crack, say, a password hash, and that gives you a credential, and you use that to access a system, that's not password cracking. That's unauthorized access. If you use that to steal any information, that's also nothing that I want to be involved with. Fraud, anytime you suddenly find yourself in a situation where you need a lawyer, that's not password cracking. Okay, so with that out the way, where do passwords come from? We think they probably first used MIT, mid 1960s. You had, large mainframe, very expensive. Everyone got allocated time sharing on a very sort of limited budget, and you needed to control that access. And this is where passwords were first used. And comes probably as no surprise that that's also where the first password breach happened. And someone called Dr. Alan Scher, he was a researcher, and he came clean about how these passwords got hacked for the very first time. And he said that late one night he basically printed the file out, so they couldn't read it directly. But he worked out that if you sent a print request through, the operators would gladly print that out for you. And he just went and got the listing. It's a great story. So again, there's a QR code to scan if you want to read more of that. And there's something else that's interesting coming out of that. If he printed that out, that means those passwords are just stored in plain text, right? So that's obviously not a very good idea. And it does, however, pose a bit of a problem. We don't really want to store plain text, but we need to check the plain text, or we need to check something to, validate that, authenticate you when you log in. So what do we do? There was a cryptographer working at Bell Labs in the 1970s, and he devised something called hashing. And basically what that does is it's a one-way function of taking anything you type in, and it turns that into a numerical code, a set of hexadecimal, just a string of bytes, really. And the important thing is that's one way. You take a message, you can convert it into a hash. You can go that way easily. It's really hard to go the other way. And this very rapidly, replaced the ways in which passwords were stored in computer systems. So what does that look like in reality? I can take the word password, I can run it through a hash algorithm, and you can see at the top of the screen, you get a list of hexadecimal. You might be having flashback nightmares to your computer science course at university now. What's interesting is if you just change one letter, you just uppercase that password, you get a completely different hash, right? And it doesn't matter how much text you put into that algorithm, less or more, you're always going to end up with a hash. In this case, it's an MD5 hash. So you're seeing 32 bytes, 32 hex characters. That actually means it's 16 bytes, 128. But that still gives you a lot of different values that could be. You can store a lot in that hash, and that number's at the bottom of the screen. I'm not going to try and read that out for you, but it's big. So how does this work in reality? How do we use password hashing? We're going to have a quick example that we're going to use today. A totally pretend site. I did actually make sure this wasn't a real site. that we're going to set up as the defenders of the passwords and called catfacts. And we're going to log in just with a username and password. And one of our friends joins our website, and we know that she sets her password to be Whiskers. And when she does that, we add a hash. You can see that password hash starting with E40 to the database along with her username. So we don't store the plain text. We don't know what that is, but we've stored it in our database, that hash. So when she comes to sign in, how does this work? She enters her username and password over here, and we use that username to retrieve the hash that we stored previously when she signed up. And then what we do is we rehash that password she's just entered, and we compare it to the one in the database. And if those match, then we know she entered the same password. We don't know what her password is, but we know she entered the same one, and that's good enough, right? So only Alice actually knows what her password is, and because this hash function is one way, no one who has access to that database, either an admin or because that database gets breached, should be able to work out what that is. And this means that no one should be able to impersonate Alice, right? So, that's my presentation. Thank you for coming. Obviously, there's a little bit more to that. There's a problem. And if we look at the catfacts database, we can see we've got Alice, E40 Penguin Keeper. That's actually a colleague of mine. 2A89, Steve 27B0, Bob E40 E0, Phil and Jamelina. That's me. I don't know if anyone else picked up those hashes match, right? It's the same hash. Okay. Well, what does this mean? Anyone, again, with access to this database can see Alice and Bob have the same password. They still don't know what it is, but because those are the same, we can assume that those users are choosing the same password. It's probably not a particularly hard password to guess, or particularly unique. So if we can guess that, we'll gain access, and guess what? We're going to get access to Alice and Bob because it's the same hash, right? So what we can do is we can open up the browser, go to any site that generates MD5. If you put the same text into the MD5 algorithm or any hash algorithm, you will always get the same hash. And we can just make some guesses. So we're making some guesses on the left: cat, meow, whisker, whiskers, fur, catfax. And we've actually already made pre-calculated guesses because everyone uses password, let me in, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are the most common passwords that people tend to use. So we've got those hashes pre-calculated. And what we're going to do, the security at catfacts is really bad. They've got a SQL injection attack, or maybe that database backup is not being secured properly. We can get a dump of that database, and we can compare those values against our guesses. And we can see, okay, Alice and Bob were using whiskers as the password. And actually, if we look down the list, my colleague Penguin Keeper is using catfacts. That's pretty disappointing, actually. But there must be a mistake here. It looks like I'm actually just using the word password as well. So that's our, as attackers, that's our first successful crack. We can now access catfacts as any one of these people. So obviously, we need to do something about this, and it's time to introduce something called salts and peppers, and I just couldn't resist it. We've already talked about hex. Let's talk about salts and peppers quickly. What am I talking about? What's a salt? That's just a unique value that we add onto each hash, or onto each part of the plain text before we hash it. We store that with a hash for people who are interested in implementing the stuff. That doesn't need to be kept hidden. It's not a secret. It's just a value that lives with the hash, and all that it does is stops this this technique that we've just used. So you can see if I now hash password plus 3 random letters A9Y, we get a completely different hash. All that we have to do is we also need to store that salt with the hash so we know how to reproduce that hash with the original password. And you can see the same for our really long password example. You just get a completely different hash as long as you store that salt. That's the important part. So there's a bit of a crisis meeting at Cat Facts. Everyone panics, and someone realizes, oh man, we better salt these hashes. Every user is required to reset their password. An email goes out, and we hear via the grapevine that 2 of those users have chosen the same password, catfacts23, right? So now when we look at this database, we can see we've got 6 users, we've got 6 different hashes, and those hashes have got salts. So even though 2 of those users have the same password, we can't tell without trying to crack these hashes which hashes those are. What does this mean in reality for putting on our attacking hat again? We now need to append that salt to every guess we make. Okay, so if we want to try and guess Alice's hash, we need to try all those, or crack the hash, we need to try all those plain texts with her particular salt. Another way of looking at this is that we need to regenerate that attack for every single user, so our attack just got exponentially harder. Okay, I mentioned salts. There's something else called a pepper, and that's just another value that we append. We generally use those with salts. The big difference with a pepper is that data that value should be kept away from the database, and that means an attacker can't just perform a successful attack if that database gets breached. Generally, peppers are kept in source code. Source code doesn't leak as often, and I can tell you from a personal experience with breaches on the internet. Peppers stop us dead in our tracks like more often than we'd like to admit, but they're actually hardly ever used. If we were looking at how that was implemented, you can see the same pepper value for those two passwords. We're just prepending that in this case. We're not storing it in the database with the hash. You can see the hashes are now completely different again compared to the salted versions. It's a good idea, and surely this should be enough. Well, it depends. So we can look at this from a software point of view. We can also look at this from a hardware point of view. So at CatFacts, people are logging in onto a server, and that server has multiple cores, maybe 4 up to 32 cores, and that means that they can do that process of comparing the hashes pretty rapidly. But as attackers, we've actually also got access to other kinds of hardware, and that's primarily graphics cards used in gaming, GPUs. And GPUs are really great for certain things because they have thousands of cores. So a top-end gaming graphics card will have 20,000 plus cores. They're not very, very complicated. They can't do very, very complicated tasks, but they can do simple tasks in parallel very, very well. And luckily, guessing a hash is a simple task. And you can actually put more than one GPU into a machine. And that means, depending on the hash type, we can generate many, many, many hashes per second, just even on a consumer grade PC. How many, or how do we use this? Well, we can't use our browser. We need to get some help. We need some software. One of the most popular tools for this, because it uses a GPU, is Hashcat. You can download it at that URL. Just follow some additional instructions if you want to get started. We do this in the workshop. How much faster? Well, let's find out. So Hashcat with mode 10 is salted MD5. We take that catfax breach, and what we can see is just taking our guesses and running them through Hashcat. The big reveal is actually all 6 of those users set their password to the same value, catfax23. We just couldn't tell because of the salt. But the other takeaway there is it didn't even take 1 second. It was absolutely trivial to crack all 6 of those. How trivial, how fast was that? Well, if we benchmark that, and I benchmark this just on my laptop, not even my main PC, it's quick. It's 1831 mega hashes per second, so 1831 million hashes per second. We can test a lot of hashes against these hash passwords, right? So back at catfax, that another crisis meeting, people are not happy. Something needs to happen. So, what can you do? Well, you can choose a different hash algorithm. So some people might be tempted to go from MD5 to SHA-1. You can increase the size of the hash. So you can go from SHA-1 to SHA-256. But that's not really a good option. That's not going to really slow anyone down. And the reason is these hashes are designed for speed, for things like database lookups and indexes, and generally comparing values. They're not really designed to be slow or to slow down someone trying to generate a lot of hashes. So what you can do is you can add something called iterations. So there's a recommendation that you use PBKDF SHA-256, but do that 210,000 times is the current recommendation. I think NIST has just increased that to 600,000. So basically, take the value that you're trying to, the password that you're trying to hash it, and then hash that again and do that 210,000 times. And then you've got a process that costs a little bit, that slows an attacker down. But even better, use a hash that's been designed to be slow and hard, and particularly things like bcrypt and Argon run a lot slower on a GPU. Argon 2 in particular, although that might not be the best option, it is a choice. And something like bcrypt. Bcrypt has been around for 20 years. Blowfish or bcrypt first came out in 1999. It's not something new, but it's a much better choice, and it's specifically designed to defeat people like me. But people like me can do other things. So we can look at the hardware side of things as well. This is the password cracking rig sitting on my desk right next to me now, actually, and there's a couple of things to notice here. Looking at this picture, that's just an off-the-shelf, actually an off-the-shelf crypto mining motherboard. Means I can put 6 GPUs on that board at once, and multiple power supply units. That's off the shelf. That'll cost under 5,000 US, including the 6 GPUs, which is by far the most expensive part of that. And the other thing I noticed was that coffee cup was really close to my hardware. That's probably not a good idea, but when you're doing this sort of thing, coffee is always important. It is to me. So how fast is how fast are those graphics cards? Let's have a look. So whereas my laptop ran at about 1800 mega hashes per second, an RTX 3080, it's 2 or 3 years old now, and that runs at 30,000 mega hashes, and 6 of those are going to run at about 184 giga hashes per second. So against salted MD5, that gives me a lot of guesses per second, right? But against something like a bcrypt, what kind of performance do we get there? If you look just near the bottom, we get about 17,500 hashes per second using bcrypt with a cost factor of 10. It's got a built-in adjustable cost factor. That's the most common. 17,000 still sounds pretty good to me. It's not in the same ballpark, but we can work with that. So I think what you can see here is there's no simple answers here. This is a bit of a cat and mouse game, and it gets more interesting. So I'm going to take a sip of water, and then we're going to talk about actual real life practical attacks against practical password hashes. I don't know if any questions or anything at this point. Just carry straight on. Okay. We've got different approaches, and what you really want to do is, based on the type of hash, is going to determine the type of attack you take. And you could be going after one single hash, so something like a Bitcoin wallet, perhaps, that someone has asked you to recover the password for, or it could be a broad attack, so it could be an entire database of hashes from during a pen test from a directory, or it could be a data breach. And that depends on both the strength of the hash and also any kind of information you may have, associated email address or user information, etc. So the first one is the one we used up to now, which is a dictionary attack, where we just take a list of everyday words, generally any day passwords. So if you've done any of this before, RockU is a breach of plain text passwords that came out about 10, 12 years ago. And it's a good starting point because those are passwords that other people have used. So, why not try them? We can combine these with rules. I'll show you how that works now. And this is a really effective way of generating large amounts of good guesses, especially for a fast hash like MD5 or SHA-1. So let's pretend that cat facts database has leaked, but we know nothing about it. We just have the hashes. How would we attack that in the real world? What would our approach be? Well, what I would do is I would download a list of as many passwords as I could get. In this case, we're going to get the 50 million most common passwords from hashmob.net. Go check them out. And what we're also going to do is we're going to combine each guess with some rules. And a rule is just simply a way of modifying your guess. So you can see my first rule is don't do anything. My second rule is let's uppercase the first character. Another one, make a plural. That's actually just add an S. And the last one, let's add the current year. Because we all know people like to and have been told to uppercase and lowercase and add a number when they're creating their passwords. So the nice thing about rules is those run right on the GPU. They're incredibly quick. They modify our guesses. For one guess whisker, we now got 16 different attempts, and we can generate more useful guesses with rules. So we're trying to crack those hashes that are catfacts23. We don't know that. But if we run this attack inside hashcat using 50 million words, we use the best 64 rule. We need to just make sure that contains the append rule 2 and 3, which it does. We run that on just one RTX 3080 graphics card. For the salted MD5 variant that CatFacts is using, the maximum amount of time that those are going to take to crack is 106 seconds, so no time at all. And it's going to cost us about 1 cent. But if we were using bcrypt, suddenly things get a lot harder. That would take nearly 2 weeks, and it would also cost us nearly $100 just in cost of electricity. So it's a bit of a deterrent, right? What happens if that initial dictionary used didn't have the term CatFacts in it? This even with 50 million words, this can definitely happen. You can always just try a bigger dictionary. If it was MD5, that was only 100 and something seconds, so we should just get the biggest dictionary we can, really. We could also add more rules. The rule sets we use are quite often thousands and thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of rules can make a difference. And sometimes it's smarter to just get a smaller dictionary, but combine those things together. So if I had a dictionary that contained the word cat and facts, I would also get to the same place. So that's a dictionary attack. The second kind of attack is a mask attack, or a brute force attack. And this is traditionally what people think password cracking is about, where you just try every single combination in the key space, and you'll be guaranteed to get the password up to a certain length. So let's have a look at this approach. How do we define these mask attacks? Well, using that syntax on the left, you can see DDDD would be all numbers. So we can generate masks like that. We can use all lowercase letters. We can use uppercase, lowercase. And if we wanted to crack CatFacts, we would have to use a mask with, 8 lowercases and 2 numbers. So what does that look like in terms of performance? Well, the salted MD5, so from 109 seconds, that goes to 12 minutes to guarantee to crack that, and about 9 cents crack, 9 cents for the cost. But what that does do is that pretty much guarantees that you're going to find that password in that key space. So if it's 8 characters, any 2 numbers, you will uncover that password. But if that hash was bcrypt, that would take 245 years to go through that key space. It would cost you $500,000. So you can see that's not practical. So choosing the correct hash type makes a big difference, especially against brute force attacks. So brute force attacks only really effective against fast hashes. So really my point there is password cracking is not about brute force and buying hardware. You cannot buy enough hardware for 245 years, but you can be smart. So let's talk about smart. The last attack I want to talk about is an associative attack. We use that for slow hashes like bcrypt. And the reason it's called associative is we're going to associate each hash with a guess that we generate individually for that hash. So we're not just throwing masks or dictionary at a general list of hashes. We're going to make specific choices for that individual hash. That means we need to know more about that hash than just the hash itself. It requires additional metadata. And to show you how this works, we'll come up with an example. So our friend Alice has a Dogecoin wallet, and that's hosted on muchwow.com, which is completely made up, by the way. And that's a cryptocurrency exchange. And she can download that wallet, but the contents of that wallet, the actual file, is encrypted using a password, and that password is stored as a hash inside that wallet. She can't access that wallet. She can't access her funds. So she can't remember the password, but she's given us the file and she's asked us to recover the password for her. And if she does that, she's going to give us some Dogecoin. So we're very excited to help her with this. So we get the wallet, we open up, we extract the hash, and what we see is the following. That looks like a Bitcoin hash, and sorry, a bcrypt hash, but that's got a cost factor of 12, which is high. And we know that we can actually only generate 21 hashes per second on one of our RTX 3080 graphics cards. Okay, do we have a problem? Are we going to be able to help her? There's actually an interesting situation here. We know more about this wallet and about this hash than just the hash in isolation. This isn't a breach that we've just been given hashes. We know that this is Alice's wallet. And so we can ask Alice for her email addresses, or we can ask her about how she creates her passwords. So if we look in our database at all the previous breaches for Alice, and she's given us her emails, we can see that she was in the CatFacts breach. She was one of the CatFacts 23 people. We can also see she was in the LinkedIn breach, and her password there was LinkedIn 84, MyHeritage 22, and MySpace, really old breach, password 123. But back in 2006, everyone used password 123. So you probably see a pattern emerging, and that's that Alice likes to create a password associated with the website she logs into. Okay, so she thinks that's quite a smart way of generating a password. It's really useful to see those passwords because we can tell she doesn't use any capitalization or any special characters. That's really useful. That cuts down the key space for us quite a lot. And we can see she's going to append 2 or 3 digits. And we know that this came from the website Much Wow. It's part of the Doge community. She says, I think it was something to do with Doge when I set that password. So we're like, okay. We come up with some terms, just 4 of them in this case. So we include Much Wow and So Wow, Doge. And she uses 2 or 3 digits. So let's append every digit from 0 to 999. So that's 1,000 times 4. So now we're going to need to run 4,000 guesses against her hash. Sounds feasible. So how do we do this in Hashcat? Well, it's mode 3200 for bcrypt. We're going to do an associative attack this time, and that means our doge.hash file is going to contain the same hash 4,000 times, and we're going to put each one of those 4,000 attempts in the Word file. We run that through, and we can see, even though this is a slow hash, we ran that through 2 minutes, 56 seconds, and in this example, we cracked the hash, and the password was MuchWow420. Alice is happy, we're happy. It's a result. So associative attacks, really low guesses per hash. We can use that against an entire breach. We don't have to target one hash. We can create one or more guesses, however you want to structure that attack. Most commonly, the way we use this is we take emails associated with those hashes, and we go and get all previously breached passwords for that email, and we try them against that hash with maybe some rules. Because we know everyone likes to use the same password everywhere, or a variation of the same password everywhere. People are generally not coming up with brand new passwords when they create an account on another website. There's just too many websites, too many passwords. We can also just use usernames and email addresses and anything associated with that hash to create targeted guesses. And what's really it's kind of cool, it's also a bit scary, is you can't really protect against this kind of attack. No hash Argon 2, bcrypt, nothing is going to protect against this, because remember, you need to validate this hash as well. Someone needs to log in, and you need to hash their password that they're logging in with to compare in the database, right? So you can't make a hash that runs for 2 or 3 minutes. The user's going to click away from your website. So you can't protect against this just by using a stronger hash type, right? Wow. That's actually my favorite attack. I'll come back to that in a bit. So again, I don't know if there's any questions or anything. I can't see the question screen.
No questions right now.
Oh, okay, cool. So where do we get this data from? Let's talk a little bit about data breaches. So things like in our example with the CatFacts database and the attackers being able to get hold of that, this happens all the time, literally every day, and it's getting worse every year, and that can be any kind of format. Bad actors, there's no standard, right? But generally, it's going to be CSV, JSON, or SQL dumps, and usually that's obtained from some kind of misconfiguration in the server, a backup that's been put on AWS, that hasn't been protected properly, or SQL injection attacks. Quite often, WordPress plugins, major problem. Certainly in the past, you install a useful WordPress plugin and it's got a massive SQL injection attack vector in it, and you wouldn't know that. Otherwise, just malware, any way where someone can get some kind of elevated permission and move through your network and gain access to a database and dump the database. And these things are posted just on the internet, in public forums. Telegram channels are very popular. And sometimes something we call the darknet, Tor, onion rooted sites as well. But in general, just out there in the public domain. So if you want to get into this, you need to know a few things. So I'm in the UK and I am allowed to download and crack these hashes, as long as that breach is in the public domain. And what that means is it's available for anyone to download. So as soon as that data goes into the public domain in the UK, I can legally use that information. If you're doing this in the US, it's a lot more complicated, and it is a bit of a gray area. If it contains any kind of financial information, it's definitely a no-no. But otherwise, it really comes down to what you intend to do with this data. So if your intent is to make money, to resell this, to gain access, then that's illegal. But if you're using this information for research or to maybe protect some customers, then you're probably okay. But I am not a lawyer, and this is not legal advice. And if you want to, please first read the guidance that I've left in that link, or is in that link down below, because it's a very difficult area. I'm UK based, so it's a lot easier for me. So I thought when I was putting this presentation together, I thought, well, let's go see how many, what are the numbers here? How often are we actually getting breaches? I haven't actually stopped to look. So I only went and looked at significant breaches, and by that I mean more than 100,000 users in a breach. And I went back the last 12 months, which might not be the best indication, because sometimes bad actors will hold this information back for a while until they can't use it anymore. But still, I found 26 significant breaches in the last year. And what was really quite amazing was 23% of those, they weren't even hashing their passwords. it was still plain text, which is really frightening, to be honest. Only 12% of those we couldn't actually determine what the hash was. So if you're thinking, I'll just use a two MD5s and a SHA-1 multiplied by 2, password crackers have got tools and are very generally the people I know are really smart, and generally they'll work out your hash algorithm. So security by obscurity, they call it, and it's not a good approach. So generally we can work the hash out. And nearly half of those, 42%, were just using those fast unsuitable hashes, SHA-1, MD5 variants, vBulletin, etc. Those are all variants of fast hashes, and only a quarter were using, bcrypt. Strong hashes. 90% of the time are going to be bcrypt. So what I'm really saying here is, you've probably got employees. They're probably using your, their work emails. They're signing up for other sites, and they're probably sharing that password. And because of the state of hashing on those sites, you can't really guarantee that those credentials aren't available in the public domain to people like myself, or bad people as well. So what do we do with these breaches? We just crack the fast hashes directly with dictionary attacks. The slow hashes, we generally just use the data that we've already got from other breaches using that associative attack method that I showed you. And like I was saying, because users are using their work email and password sharing, just from home on their personal devices. If you have got a password in in your as part of your authentication method, then you're vulnerable, and there's kind of not much you can do directly about that. Where do we get this kind of stuff? Pretty much just in a browser. So this is a forum that you can go to. It doesn't exist anymore. You can download this stuff, but they tend to get taken down because that data has been acquired illegally, and quite often these guys are doing lots of other things as well. But for every one that gets taken down, another one springs up pretty quickly. And I thought I'll just show you how does this look like in real life. So when I put this presentation together in April, I went onto one of these sites. I noticed, pretty much the first new breach. This guy is a well-known bad actor. Actually, this is a real breach. This is real data. Higher tail. So I downloaded it. I opened it up and I looked in the file, and you can see a number of things there. You can see email addresses. Most of those look like Gmails and stuff. There'll be some company email addresses in there as well. And I just did a small amount of analysis. So if I highlight one of those hashes, you can see it's 32 hex characters. That means it's probably MD5. And if I search for that hash in the file, I see there's at least 5 copies of that hash. Well, what does that tell me? It's probably not even salted. Okay, so we take the useful information out of this this file, email and a hash, and we load this into Hashcat. Mode 0, straight MD5, attack 0, just a dictionary attack. Stick in that file we've just passed, get a large dictionary from Hashmob. I think that's that's many million, and just a small rule, best 64. So those are the best 64 rules that over time we've come to work out, generally give the best results. We run that through Hashcat, and that only takes 2 minutes. And in 2 minutes, we recover 30% of 114,000 individuals. when we run this workshop and I run that command, you literally see real credentials falling down the console. We call that raining planes. Those are real credentials. If I was a bad actor, I could start testing those credentials against the website that these came from, and other sites, or against things like Office 365. And that happens a lot. So what can I personally do with this? I'll use this to recover any of these more complex hashes like bcrypts. I've now got fresh guesses. I'll go run those. I may upload this to Hashmob in an anonymized format. Hashmob is a community where we have a competition and we share the results of the hashes we crack, and to demonstrate again that password security is pretty bad. And we also upload this into our database, so that anyone who wants to use this data, any of our customers, can be protected. So if anyone was in that Hightail breach and they're also using that password as their Windows password, pretty quickly, the Active Directory flag will get reset for that user. And you may think that you might want to contact the website and say, "Hey, there's been a breach, and I've discovered this information," and I rarely get a response. I think people think that it's they ignore that, unfortunately, but I have tried. So we were talking about employees and stuff. What about Windows? What about Active Directory? It's Windows. Surely these these passwords are stored as hashes, and these would be good hashes. And actually, the surprising fact is, just on-prem, those hashes are stored as unsalted MD4. Really, really fast hash. If you're in a hybrid, it's a little bit better, but not much. Those of you who work in this area will know, okay, well, actually this data is also encrypted. It's not quite as simple as that. But bear in mind that anyone with domain admin privileges can dump that database, crack those hashes, and then behave as though they are that user. And if they ever got malware on that machine, on their machine, again, the same thing. The hash is not protecting the password, which it kind of at work makes me feel like that. As a hacker, I'm kind of a little more excited maybe. It's not much of a challenge though. So what happens if we try and crack these Active Directory hashes? Let's have a look. Luckily, an IT software business, who shall remain nameless, allowed me to share this information with you. And what we did is it's 123 users. We dumped the AD database. We got the hashes. We ran this for 8 hours in total. And what we found was 6 of those users, they were just using the company name, or the location of that company straight up. 3 people were obviously not happy at work and were using F-bombs and that kind of thing. 5 of those were football related. That's English football, but any kind of sports team is, the same thing applies. 5 of those cracks were just first names. You may think maybe your first name is a good choice for a password, but actually there aren't that many in the world. There's only about 20,000 first names, and with something like an NTLM hash, that's no time at all to check those. 4 were just dates. Again, not many dates we have to check, so that was an interesting choice. And actually, passwords that were 10 characters or under, 29 of those. So because that's a fast hash, we can actually just use one of those mask attacks and just go through the whole key space and literally hoover up any password under 10 characters. And actually, we cracked, although we ran the attack for 8 hours, we actually cracked 30% of those in under 2 minutes and 48% overall, which is kind of cool. So you're probably thinking, okay, so how do I set a secure password? If I need to use a password, if that's the situation I'm in, what can I do? Really the best thing, the number one thing to do is you need to generate some kind of a random password, something fairly long and something that you couldn't have thought up yourself. You need the machine to generate that. Your browser does that for you, or you can use third-party password managers. They're free for personal use. You don't have to use them. But how do you secure access to that password manager? And most of the time, these password managers store that data in the cloud. There'll be a login to the cloud, and then there'll be a master password, but still a password. So if you then choose a password and you don't choose that very well, then actually you've just given me access to all of your passwords, not one password. So secure that adequately, ideally with an MFA factor or a passkey or something like that. If you again just have to use a password, then you need to make sure it's long. Longer is better, as they say. And if you need to create a password, then passphrases made up of formal words, is a way to go. So anyone who's seen the XKCD comic will be familiar with correct horse battery staple. That is the kind of 4 words you should choose. Obviously not those 4 words, because everyone knows about that. And you may be thinking, oh, something like "May the Force be with you." That's a super long password. No one will ever guess that. Well, actually, we will, because that's kind of just really one thing made up. It's made up of many words, but that'll be in a dictionary somewhere. And be aware of this association attack that I can use to great effect. So you're going to have to choose a password that I can't get or relate back to you in any way. So don't use the names of your kids. Don't use a password that you've used anywhere else that's been in a breach. And finally, if you're using your browser as a password manager, or just in general, secure your primary email again with MFA, a passkey, or a really, really good password. Because I can type your email into any website and push the forgot password link. And if I have control over your email, I can access any of your accounts anywhere. They're going to send me a password reset link. So again, take special care on your primary email account. And I think the other thing is, whatever you use, your browser, your password manager, if you're using Active Directory or something like that, you need a mechanism for making sure that those passwords haven't appeared in a breach. Even if that's generated in a password manager and it's completely random, if that password is compromised, the randomness doesn't matter. I'm going to use that password against you if you've used that password in more than one place. So just to really emphasize that, coming back to the point earlier, I said, well, I have 24 million personal cracks on hashmob.net. 90% of those were association attacks. I used breach data, and those weren't against simple hashes. I leave the simple hashes for the other guys. And looking up the stats, just over 13 million PBKDF SHA 256, 12 to 24,000 rounds, most of my cracks, and 8.2 million bcrypts. So if those people hadn't reused their passwords, I wouldn't have recovered their Dubsmash and Wattpad and all those credentials. So how does this affect me personally, and potentially my organization? And I'm using MFA, right? So this doesn't affect me. You know, MFA means I don't need to worry about my password. Well, am I safe? It depends. So what you should really, if you're using a password and the MFA, you should, you know, that's multi-factor. You really want to make sure that that password is still a good factor. Don't just use that MFA factor as a sticking plaster over the bad password, because guess what? MFA can be phished and can sometimes be phished quite easily. And if I happen to have your password and then generate an MFA challenge, and you're not expecting that, I can use that against you, right? So when passwords are part of your MFA stack, then protect that password, and that means audit them in some way, check that they're not in breach databases, educate your users, you know, get your users using a password manager, practice some kind of security management around that password, or just get off passwords. You know, I think as much as, you know, whatever we do, you know, and you might have a strategy where you're migrating away from passwords to kind of passwordless and phishing resistance. You know, protect those passwords while you still use them, but have a plan to get away from them. Passkeys are something that's relatively new, and it's early days, but let's see how, you know, where the world goes with that. That looks like a good option. But also just be aware of things like the coal pipe incident, where the employee had left. They had good security, but they had an exposed endpoint, and it was just password security, and on a VPN endpoint, and that VPN got compromised, and that took down the Colonial pipeline, like millions. I think it was $85 million damage, something like that. That's all from me. I think
James,
Eamon
yep.
just wants to talk this through, and I'm going to hand over to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. One of the things that I loved when I saw this presentation originally was I did not realize that my data had been exposed as well in the LinkedIn breach. I had used that password for pretty much my bank accounts, my Netflix login, my Amazon Prime. And after your presentation, I went and I changed all my passwords. So thank you very much. For those who are familiar, Interseed now has offerings from password to PKI management. For password management, NIST recommends you check your passwords against a dictionary. Our password breach dictionary is over 6 billion and growing daily. We offer strong password policies and enforcement. We offer multi-factor authentication for things such as FIDO, one-time password, push notifications, deviceless PIN grid, one-time passwords. And of course, we originally started with credential management. If you would like to have a more in-depth conversation about any of these aspects or see a demo, please let us know. Interseed would actually like to offer you a free domain audit. And for a free domain audit, what we would do is we would use your company's internet domain to search through our database of the 6 billion plus credentials, find all the relevant entries, including where the users shared their credentials with third-party sites. We can then give your organization, each individual user, a risk score to assess how they stack up to and highlight the worst offenders in your organization. Unlike some other tools, our results don't just say that the user has been in a breach. If we know we have the actual password, we'll have the clear text on that. If you have any questions about that, please let us know. If this information isn't valuable enough for you, we can also run a full AD credential audit. to highlight, amongst other things, any AD accounts that you have that are currently using known breach passwords and thus not in this compliance. With that, we do have a couple questions that came in.
Okay.
The first one, James, is how up to date is your password breach database?
So Penguin Keeper, we mentioned him right up front with Catfax. He actually is a colleague of mine as well, and it's his full-time job to update that. And I think he told me we're at 7 billion now, growing all the time. It's like 1 or 2 million credentials per day that get added to that database.
So just one thing I wanted to augment with that. When I got to speak with Penguin Keeper as well, I talked to him and he said, one of the things that we do here is we also cleanse the data, which I thought was interesting. There are other password data breach dictionaries out there, but a lot of times they have repetitive users inside of it. In ours, we actually go through and kind of purify that. We also take out other information. So we're purely just looking at the passwords and the email addresses. Then the next question that I have, my company just did an audit. We should feel secure, correct?
Yes, it's a good thing, absolutely, that you're doing those audits. Absolutely. A couple of things I can point out. One is, okay, you may have asked those users to reset their password, but do you have any control over what they set that password to? Did they just choose that same password and stick another number on the end? That's the one thing. And then even if they have got a password that's secure right now, how long is it to your next audit? And what happens if that password is one of those 1 or 2 million per day that we upload? That means if we've seen it, bad actors have it. So really what you want to do is issue a, be watching that stuff constantly and issue a password reset against that user as soon as possible. And again, I would say, like, we have this really big database, and we can use that when we, if we audit. And we're also really good at cracking. So again, whether it's some kind of password security management ongoing, software, or if it's just a one-off, audit, I feel like we could probably do a really good job for you.
So I got two questions that are kind of related, and I actually can answer these. I like the easy ones. Will we share the slide deck, and will we share the presentation? So yes, we will be sharing this presentation with everybody who's registered. We will email a link to this, and they will be able to watch it at their own time period. The last question I have, why would I let an outside company access to one of my domain controllers?
I wouldn't. Generally, it's a scary thing. I think I've shown you why. Generally, so if we're talking about an audit, there's steps we could take. So we can bring, we can even ask you to set up specific equipment and do something that's completely air gapped, or we can bring in something which you then control and look at that process holistically with you. In terms of an audit, nothing needs to leave that machine or that network. In terms of a tool, something like our PSM tool, there's two ways of approaching this. One, we can give you a dump of that database once a month, or in a certain time period. Or there are ways of checking your hashes against our cloud database in a smart way that those hashes don't actually leave the network. And what you do is you kind of make a request, and we send a whole lot of hashes back that could match that password. And then there's a local operation. It's called K anonymity. that determines if that hash has, that password has actually been breached or not. So there are ways that we can tackle that, and more than happy to have a conversation about that if anyone's interested.
Awesome. Well, James, thank you very much for your time today. We do have a couple other questions, and I will email those people individually back. We will be sharing this presentation. If you would like to have a more in-depth conversation with James or one of our other technical experts, please feel free to contact Interseed. My information is eamon.boyle@interseed.com. My cell phone is 609-827-0680. You can call me. I can set up a session to, dive deeper into what we've touched on here. Thank you guys very much. Have a wonderful day.